And I forgot to hit record.
I just let 2 additional people in. Oh, and another one.
If you're just joining us, our parents are out in some breakout rooms right now having some collaborative conversations. I've assigned everybody that's just been added to our session tonight to a breakout room. You're welcome to go and join them so you can listen in on the conversation. They're going to be there for about 4 more minutes, but you're also welcome to wait here for us to have everybody return to us.
Mr. Penley, I'm not sure if you're watching this, but 3 more participants just joined in.
Yeah, I'm trying to keep up with them as they pop up in the breakout room panel.
Okay, great.
Hi, did somebody ask for help?
Hey, sorry, I had to step out for a second because I had a phone call and I didn't know what, and I missed the instructions for I'm failing at classroom activities.
No problem. We are actually about to come back together in about 2 more minutes. We were just
Okay.
having a quick conversation around whether we think distance learning is easier for adults or easier for students.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank
All
you,
right.
Mr. Penley.
Sure, no problem.
Circumstances. We talked about distractions around the house, whether it's dogs, doorbells, siblings, and just, figuring out a way to navigate those distractions. Picking up on cues from the kids and they're frustrated, and just that the teachers having the ability to do that. One of the other things I was thinking about too is where just how are they going to get that individual time with teachers? I know that's going to be hard in the virtual environment, but I think that's going to be important in some cases when kids are struggling and just need a little bit of one-on-one time. Is there anything else you all have?
I think the second part of the question we need to answer really quick with.
Christina, did you know that people can send a request for help from a breakout room?
I did, isn't it cool?
That was amazing. Like I just went to 3 rooms because people were asking for help and it was just click, answer a question, click, answer a question. That was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it's a pretty cool feature.
Got about 10 more seconds and the rest of our breakout groups will have joined us again. And here everybody comes flooding back in.
You can say hello.
I accidentally just muted somebody. I'm sorry if that was you. I was trying to let someone in from the waiting room and my mouse got out of control.
That is absolutely a Zoom Zoom hazard. So welcome back. I hope that everyone had an interesting conversation. And if you didn't have an interesting conversation, I hope that you at least met somebody who might be interesting. Are there 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 people who wouldn't mind either sharing out sort of what their conversation sounded like or sharing out their group's answer to the question, do you think it's easier or do you think online learning is harder for adolescents or adults? Can we maybe get somebody from group? Oh, you probably don't remember what groups you were in, do you? So I'm not going to ask that. Is there anybody who would volunteer to share out with us?
I would go.
Thank you.
Our group, we had some folks who are brand new to CMS and some who are 8th graders, and I think we're all very optimistic. We talked about how maybe these kids who are so used to technology are more ready for this than we would be to sit in seats all day for 8 hours. I mean, a lot of us do that for our work, but in front of the screen, maybe what we were hoping is that during those 25 minutes off, that sometimes the teachers might say, go take a walk outside and, you know, write down 3 things that you see or hear or smell, just to make sure that they're not glued to their seats all day. Because one of our participants said that their kid during orientation never got up for 2 hours this morning, glued to their seat. And sometimes we all need a little reminder to get up and stretch and move around, both adolescents and grown-ups.
Absolutely. And our intent ultimately, and we've been focusing on the instructional side, but to be able to provide some suggestions for activities students might do during their extended lunch period and during times when they have some asynchronous time. I will just say our orientation wasn't structured as a lesson, and so I hope that your students are not walking away from that feeling like that's what their everyday is going to be like. That was really just a really flash bang fastest way we could do to make sure every kid has a chance to at least visit their classrooms and test out the technology. So thank you for that feedback. That was a really interesting conversation. Jennifer, are you willing to share next for us? I see your hand.
Yeah, sure. We had some very similar conversations in terms of sharing what we thought our kids needed. We heard a lot of that hands-on demonstration, something that's interactive is good for kids this age. And that they are very independent. They like to learn things on their own and they like to be able to figure it out on their own, but they also need reminders. Maybe they're not as good as organizing their time as adults are, and so that there's the need to check in with them often. We had a briefer discussion on, you know, adults versus kids and to who's better, and a lot of the adults in my room thought the adults will be better with this kind of online learning. I think maybe because it's similar to what we're used to doing, or maybe we've had to do it more during the shutdown than our kids have. But we also think there's probably a bigger difference and a bigger difference between introverts and extroverts versus maybe adults and kids in terms of who's comfortable staring at themselves and having the camera on them all day versus folks that would really rather be at the back of the classroom and have nobody looking at them.
Right. Those are all very good points. Yeah, absolutely. So normally I would probably go with a couple of more people to share and see if we could find maybe some patterns or some connections between the things that are shared. In the interest of time tonight, because I know that y'all probably have some burning questions that you want me to answer for you that aren't in teacher voice, we're gonna go ahead and finish up our lesson. And so our next activity is just for me to give you just a little bit of information to sort of ground the discussions that you've just had. When we think about adolescence, and again, we're thinking about that period just after puberty, and I'm thinking of early adolescence. Adolescence extends up into high school. I'm thinking more of our 11, 12, 13, 14-year-olds. 5 characteristics that we try to consider as we're thinking about how we plan are that middle school students, adolescents, are in a stage of significant growth and development. That's the hormones that everybody always talks about. They're also in this weird undefined state where people don't treat them like children anymore because they look a little bit like adults, again, connecting to that biological growth and development, but they're also not really adults because their frontal lobe and their decision making hasn't fully developed yet. And so they're in this midpoint where it's hard for them to really know which world they should live in. I'm seeing a lot of that in my kid right now. There's an increase in decision making. This is where students are really deciding what they have autonomy over. Those of you who have 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, they used to ask you before they did things, and then all of a sudden there's this point in your life where they just start telling you what they've done. That's really recently happened to me. That's why my face looks the way that it does. And so it's like, I go home every now and again and my child goes, by the way, I did blah, blah, blah today. I'm like, you did what? And you didn't even text me? And that's because they're starting to develop that sense of autonomy. While having that autonomy, there's also an increased sense of pressure. A lot of these pressures are peer related and media related. And so the decision making is often influenced by the pressures that they have, as well as that fact that they're in their undefined status and they don't know whether they're a kid or an adult yet. And they've also got all these things going on as their body grows and develops. And then finally, and this is the one that you hear me talk about a lot, is this whole idea that they're searching for who they are and that they're in a formative stage of identity development. And that's what I love about middle school. I love being able to help our students identify who they are and what contribution they want to make to our community. And so I'm sure that you saw some, go ahead. Did I have a question?
Mr. Penley, are you wanting to share your screen right now? We're not seeing your slides.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you for pointing that out. There we go. Hopefully that's a little bit better. I apologize for that oversight. And then the last thing again was that search for self, that identity development. And so the last thing that I'm going to ask us to do today is we're going to use that Menti tool once again. One of the things that we know about introducing new digital tools to students is that one, it should be done in a live environment. We shouldn't ask students to engage with new tools when we're not there to help them with them. And that we also shouldn't try to introduce too many tools too quickly. And so that's why I've chosen to stay with the Menti tool both for our activator and our summarizer today. So if you wouldn't mind opening up a web browser, you're going to go back to menti.com. That's MENTI.com. When you get there, you're going to enter this code 862565 and 5. And I'm going to put that in the chat so that I can go to a different page. And so that code is now in the chat. Now I've got to move us to our next slide. And what I'm going to ask you to do, if you don't mind, is I've listed about 8 different characteristics that sort of are associated with schooling. I want you to rank them in your mind. What is the most important thing for us to consider or try to include as we're thinking about the needs of young adolescents, all the way down to what do you think the least important thing is that we need to consider or include as we're trying to work with young adolescents. And if we'll take just a minute, rank them in order from 1st to 8th, and we're going to see if your ranking of them, and I did this with my faculty too, so this isn't a brand new thing. We're going to see if your rankings align with how we prioritized them as we went through our planning. I'm going to give you about a minute to go in and make your rankings. Go. I have one teacher who's gotten really skilled at the music, like they can toggle back and forth and turn the music back on and turn it off. I haven't had a lot of success going back and forth with it, so I'm sorry that we're working in silence right now. I know we could all use a little bit more Creedence Clearwater Revival. All right. Interesting. Study skills and collaboration are warring with each other over which is more important. I was not predicting that. Ms. Lurch, were you? No, I'm not going to put you on the spot. I'm sorry. It's also really interesting to me how rigorous content and curriculum started sort of at a high place and has steadily worked its way down. That's interesting. I wonder if that means maybe we learned something from our lesson today. Also, as I'm sort of stepping out of my teacher role and editorializing and talking about the teacher skills that would be employed in a situation like this, this is a formative assessment. Like I'm looking to see how much of what we've talked about tonight really sort of sunk in with you, because our prioritization of these things are directly related to those 5 characteristics. They're directly related to what we know about early adolescence and their learning needs. So it looks like I've got 47 responses at this point, so I'm going to cut it off at this point, and it looks like that we have identified clear learning goals as our most important thing. We also believe in clear learning goals. That's why you saw our learning intentions and our success criteria at the very beginning of our lesson. Your students can expect to see those at the beginning of each of their lessons. Clear directions, we have really muddled through that part of things as we've learned about our new tools, and we have really figured that we have to have very clear, very succinct directions for students in a digital environment because it's so easy for it to go haywire. Study skills is a really interesting one. I see the need for organization, but we honestly prioritized collaboration above that. We know that middle schoolers have an innate need for social interaction, and so we prioritize collaboration and opportunities for collaboration a little bit higher than study skills. We also, because of that whole idea of autonomy and students beginning to be their own decision makers, we've talked a lot about choice as a need for young adolescents as well, and that the more that we can incorporate choice, the more engaged our students will be. So I'm going to pop back out of that right now. I really appreciate y'all engaging with that in a meaningful way. I know that as adults, especially at 5 o'clock in the evening after you've worked a full day, you don't necessarily want to engage in a lesson, but I thought it was important for you to see what a lesson might look or feel like for your students. Now, what might change in this lesson or in this sort of format for lessons is the digital tools that we use might change, the way that we collaborate with each other might change, the purpose of the breakout rooms might change, the organization of those breakout rooms might change. There are lots of things that are sort of interchangeable within this type of lesson, but you should expect your students to have a clear learning target, to have an activating strategy or activity that gets them excited about the work that they're going to do for the day or taps into their prior knowledge for it. You should expect them to have opportunities to interpret new content and receive new content, opportunities to collaborate with their peers, and then ultimately opportunities to engage in higher order thinking and evaluation, and then for teachers to have formative assessment opportunities as well. And so I'm going to stop right there, because that was a lot of information real fast. I appreciate that. I did forget to hit record when we started our lesson, and so I'm gonna have a lot of people on Facebook really upset with me. I am recording now. Now that we're gonna move to the question and answer portion, I am gonna move us live to Facebook. So if you'll give me just a second to start that. If you're uncomfortable being live on Facebook, by all means, please feel free to turn off your camera. I completely get that. I wouldn't want to be live on Facebook either, but anybody who wants to leave their camera on, you can. I don't have a choice. I kind of have to. And there we go. And if you'll give me just a minute to make sure that it works. I'm sorry, it'll be about 10 more seconds. All right, and so just so everybody knows, we are now live on Facebook. For all of our Facebook friends who might be joining us as we're getting started here, I super apologize. I forgot to hit the record button and send us live as we started our model lesson. I'll be happy to do a revision of that at some point over the next week if I need to. I am live now because we're going to move into our question and answer portion, where I'm just going to give our parents who are joining us here an opportunity to ask any questions they have about our distance learning plan, about what their kids should expect, or about any logistical questions they may have about the district's plan for supporting students and families. And so if you open up that participant window that we used at the beginning of our lesson, there should be a place for you to put your hand up. Since there are 86 of us here, I'm going to ask you to raise your hand, and then I'll call on people to answer any questions that you have. Don't everybody raise their hand at once. Come on, I've seen y'all in board meetings. I've seen you on Facebook pages. I know y'all have questions. DV, who likes sushi, would you like to ask a question?
Sure. What kind of social activities, or let's say PE or anything like that, would be available to the children during this time?
That's a great question. We are going to continue to offer our connections enrichment courses, so we'll still have courses that students will be scheduled for during the day in the arts, physical education, career technical and agricultural education, and world languages. And then in addition to that, we have a number of teachers who volunteered to lead clubs. that'll take place either during asynchronous time or after the regular school times. And so I think some of the ones that we already have in mind is our 8th grade would like to do a peer leadership group and a peer court group. Our ag teacher already wants to do an FFA group. We have an 8th grade teacher who wants to host a music appreciation group because, you know, here in Athens, it's hard to escape musicians. And so we are going to continue to offer some extracurricular activities where we can as well. Those will all be virtual though. Again, you're welcome to raise your hand. I can only see about a quarter of the participants without scrolling back and forth between windows. And so if you would use the raise your hand button in the chat or in the participant window, that'll help me. Ms. Vonkenthong.
How is grading going to work for the kids?
Grading will be very similar to the way that grading has been done in the past. The district as a whole across all secondary schools changed the weights for some of our grading. And so just to give you a quick assessment primer in middle school. So we have 4 categories of grades in middle school. There's summative assessments. Sorry, I can't find where my camera is. There's summative assessments. Those are like tests, big projects. Those are things that we ask students to do to show us whether or not they've mastered content. The second category is formative assessments. Those are sort of along the way. Those are things that teachers use to let them know how well students are engaging with the material and how well they're learning it and whether they need to adapt their instruction. There's homework. I'll talk again about homework in just a second because I don't want to go on a bird walk quite yet. And so homework is a grading category. And then we also have interim assessments. These are district level assessments that will be given quarterly. So for this year, summative assessments will count for 30% of a student's grade. Formative assessments will count for 50% of a student's grade. Homework will count for 10% of a student's grade, and those interim assessments will count for 10% of a student's grade as well. That will all be published in teacher syllabi that will be available through our distance learning website that I shared with students this morning, and so you don't need to memorize all those numbers. The thing that parents need to know about that change is that shifted the weight from the summative category into the formative category. So last year we put a heavier weight on tests that measured what students had already mastered. This year we're putting a heavier weight on whether students are engaging and participating and working towards mastery. And so when you see grades on report cards and progress reports, those grades are going to tell you a little bit more about whether students are engaging with the work and a little less about their mastery. We've asked teachers in their grade books to mark assignments as summative or formative, so you should be able to see it. And so if you see that your child is doing poorly on summative assessments, that's going to be an indication to you that they need more support with the content. If you see that they are doing really well with their formative assessments, that means that they're really trying hard, they're engaging, they're logging in daily, they're doing all the things their teachers are asking them to do to try to be successful. And then ultimately that 10% for the interim assessments, that's sort of a good, almost like a standardized test measure, because those tests are going to come from outside of our building to let us know where students are, both in compared to the content that they're supposed to have learned and mastered, as well as compared to other schools and other levels. While I'm on that subject, I am going to talk just briefly about homework. I had a lot of students, as we talked about homework in our student orientation, go, well, we're already at home. How can you give us more homework? Homework should not be a significant portion of time. Our philosophy, and this is both in face-to-face instruction as well as in distance instruction, is that our job at the middle school level is to help students develop habits that will allow them to be successful in high school. We have a lot of students who matriculate into Clarke Central and take AP Government, Accelerated Math, Honors English, all as 9th graders. Those are very rigorous courses, and they need to be prepared to set aside time separately every day to study. Your child shouldn't be spending more than maybe 30 to 45 minutes, maybe 45 minutes for some of our students who are in high school level classes on homework each day, and it should be material that they have already mastered previously in their courses. And again, that is just so that they start developing the habit of, hey, I do have to devote some independent time to working on school. Ms. Reed.
Thanks, Mr. Penley. I have a question about the social aspect of it, especially for our 6th graders or new students to Clarke Middle. of course, as you know, all the kids are looking at who's in my class. Now they're, after coming out of elementary school, looking at their classes going, hang on a minute, I don't know anybody in here. What are ways that teachers will be able to help those kids make connections and maybe even new friendships through this virtual learning?
That's a really great question. We are troubleshooting and problem solving it as we go. I feel like our work with restorative practices, we're moving into year 3, and so the circle process, the community building circle process is well embedded in what we do, and we have transitioned that into a digital format. And so all students will have an advisement group of about 10 to 20 students that they'll work with regularly throughout the year that will be sort of a safe initial cohort for them. And then I'll also just say, I feel like my 6th grade team really recognizes the transitional nature of 6th grade, and they work very hard to incorporate opportunities for students to get to know each other, to learn each other's names, to find people who have common interests with them as part of their instruction every day, whether it's through those activating activities, whether it's through summarizers, whether it's through the way that they group students. They are very well aware of that need. I think I do need to just be transparent and say that's going to be a challenge. It is harder to make connections through this format than it is in person, but we do have it as it is at the forefront of our brains as we are planning.
Mr. Penley, there are a handful of questions that are coming through the chat. I didn't know if you wanted to pause to answer a couple of those before you move on.
Absolutely. I'll go back to Miss McClellan. And I also really love Brussels sprouts, roasted, with a little bit of garlic and some lemon juice. Lovely. What would a typical Friday look like? So our Fridays are built around asynchronous instruction. So if you were with us in the spring, where we posted assignments that students would have access to that they could then use to practice material that they had learned previously, some of the assignments will look similar to those, but instead of being in the spring, we used completely review content. Fridays now will be reviewing the material that we've learned very recently, like learned within that week. Most of our grade levels, actually, I don't want to say that because I think that may be wrong. I know at least one of our grade levels is planning to share with students and parents a template of a schedule that a student might run just to sort of keep themselves on a schedule for Fridays, where they have some time to do their asynchronous activities or their work, and then some time with some suggestions for things they might do during the rest of the time that day. For some of our students, Fridays will change week to week. If your student is a student who needs specific support, maybe through their special education virtual learning plan or their IEP, if you have a student who serves through English as a second language services, through a 504 plan, through gifted services or other enrichment services, they may receive invitations from the program teachers within those programs to do additional either one-on-one, small group or larger group work on Fridays as well. Those will typically take place in the morning hours so that we can leave the afternoon hours for students to have, again, opportunities to get away from a screen, to go outside, to do something that's not academic. Hope I went the wrong way. Ms. Walker has asked, what's the district attendance policy? That's a really good question. And we have not gotten an official policy from the district yet. I've seen where the district is having conversation around how they want to handle attendance. And so I can't speak to the district policy. What I can say is that at Clarke Middle School, we are going to take attendance each period. During the synchronous portion of the lesson, we're going to enter that attendance into Infinite Campus so that parents who are having to leave their children at home, like I am, have a way of knowing whether their child is logging in or not logging in. But then ultimately, if a child has a barrier, I've already talked to 3 or 4 parents who say, for instance, my child has to watch their younger cousin from 10 to 11, and so they're going to have a hard time logging in. We're going to accommodate that. I have another family whose children are being transported from one child care location to another child care location in the early afternoon, and that's going to make it hard for them to be in their 5th period. Again, we're going to accommodate that. Ideally, we'll accommodate it through providing the same instructional materials that they would have got during the synchronous lesson, potentially supplemented with videos or other media that students could consume to help get that lesson. It's something, and that's something that I think is really hard for us to really predict the best way to respond to it until we've been in it for just a little bit. And so I'm hoping that after our first couple of weeks of online instruction, we will be able to come back and say, here are some clear procedures for how we're going to deal with students who have trouble attending live. Again, though, if a child has a barrier, we're not going to hold them accountable for that barrier and make attendance a punitive thing. We're going to treat attendance as a support that we need to provide. The second part of that question, I just saw that today, Ms. Walker, about the Secretary of Education denying Georgia's request for a waiver of standardized testing. I'm not sure yet. We're going to have to go back and reprioritize the standards that we're going to teach, because standardized testing is going to take about 11 days of instruction away from us, and we've already lost quite a few days of instruction. And then we are also going to encourage our school communities to vote. Vote for people who recognize the situation that we're in, who will appoint people who will make good decisions about education. I was honestly hoping that COVID-19 would be our opportunity to begin escaping from the current standardized testing regime, I guess is the best word that I can say. But unfortunately, that clearly is not going to happen. We're going to have to continue to advocate for changes to standardized testing. Thank you for that question, Ms. Walker. Ms. Larson has asked about world languages. Her sixth grader was not placed in a first semester world language. Will she be placed in it for the second semester? So at the sixth grade, just to give an idea of what those courses are like, at sixth grade, world languages is less about actual language acquisition, and it's more about the culture of language and sort of dipping your toe into language acquisition. So the fact that they might only have it for a quarter or a semester is not going to be an issue. They don't really start to dig deeply into the actual acquisition of language until seventh grade, and then we offer at the eighth grade level a high school Spanish 1 and French 1 course. So as far as that goes, we placed students in connections classes based on the preferences that they sent us from their fifth grade survey. And so if students did not request a world language, they won't be placed in a world language at all. But students who did, I believe, and Ms. Lurch, can you confirm for me, all of our students were able to be placed in their connections classes of choice, correct?
Correct. All students received the choices that they made. I think one of the confusions that I have answered a couple other times with parents is the schedule that we emailed out to students only included their first semester or first quarter classes. So in seventh and eighth grade, the connections run a semester long, and in sixth grade, they're a quarter long. And along the lines of what Mr. Penley said, the quarter long classes are designed to give them like a taste of all the cool stuff we offer in connections. So you're only seeing what they're starting with. If you want to see your child's full year schedule, if you log into Parent Portal, you're able to see all 4 quarters of their schedule, so you can see if they're scheduled for different classes later in the year.
Thank you for weighing in on that. Dr. Gamble has asked, will all the lessons be recorded in case a child needs to participate asynchronously later in the day? In a case like that, how will attendance be handled? So the first question, we are not at this point recording everything. So when you think about, I've got 80 teachers in the building times 5 classes that they're teaching a day, that turns into a lot of storage space that we don't have the technological capacity to do. What I have asked teachers to do is to think about within their lesson, where is the point where the direct instruction is coming? Where is the point where the student really needs to know what it was that the teacher was saying, and for them to record those in segments so that they will be available to send to students later. The other piece that students will have when they miss classes for one reason or another is all of our teachers' presentations will be posted to their content level websites that are linked within our distance learning website. So at any point, you as a parent or the student themselves can go in, they can review the material from that lesson. And then again, at any point, if a child misses a lesson and they've read through the materials that are online available for them, they've watched whatever video the teacher has, and they're still like, I got no idea what's going on here. And I could see that happening really in math more than anywhere else, really earliest. There are opportunities for them to email their teacher with request assistance. We do have some time that teachers are working that are not necessarily direct instruction time, and so that might be where a teacher keeps that kid during the asynchronous portion of the lesson, maybe for 10 minutes just to go over yesterday's lesson that they missed. It might be a time where in that period from 8:30 to 9, before classes have started, they can meet with the child. And then we've also always got that Friday time and some of that after school time as well. As far as attendance, and I'll have to walk this back if I get a policy from the district that's different. But right now, my thought around attendance is that attendance is data gathering for us. we're not sending letters. We're not taking kids to attendance panel right now. We're using attendance to identify where there's a barrier to a kid participating. And so as far as that goes, we're going to mark that they were not in the live session in campus so that you know, so that we know, and so that as we're identifying the students who are having trouble logging in, we know who they are. But ultimately, the result of marking it as an absence is that we're going to call and we're going to ask, why wasn't your child able to participate? And if you're like, they had an orthodontist appointment, we're going to go check. Great, orthodontist appointment. We don't have to worry about it. But if you say, we moved and our Wi-Fi hasn't been installed yet, and it's not going to be for 5 days because charter can only give me a window from 8 to 5 on Friday in a blue moon, then we'll address that and we'll figure out how we support your child until they have internet. If we find out that there's another barrier, then we're going to seek to remove that barrier or to support with that barrier wherever